Hello, Faye, and a happy birthday. And hope you had a good birthday, good day. It's nice to see you on here. Get a few more on. This is going to be going back, well, to I'd say probably about four years or so that I started on this subject, and it's been pushed to the side. Hello, Marie. It's been pushed to the back burner, I would say, because there's been so much stuff going on over the last, well, hey Jim, over the last, 4 years or more. Well, let's say 11 years, but I'm trying to think when I started, 8 years ago. Okay, so probably, wow, time flies. So probably 7 years since I got on this topic here. So, anyways, let's get into it. It's about the United Nations, but as you are all aware, I'm sure that we started out with the League of Nations. It failed. That was created on the January 10th, 1920. Woodrow Wilson was the president at the time. It was his brainchild, and there was Lynn, and the primary mission was a collective security after World War One, disarmament and world security and stuff like that, diplomatic arbitration. That didn't work out because, for one thing, they didn't have a military. They didn't have enough countries involved. The They had an assembly and a council and a secretariat. The three different arms of the League of Nations. So, anyways, that failed. They had a few successes. They brought in a bunch of hundreds of thousands of refugees from after World War One. But other than that, they did a little bit on global disease and human trafficking. So that was pretty much it. And then that was disbanded, I think, 1949, maybe. That's when the UN was formed, United Nations. And they started out to prevent another global war and to maintain international peace and security through a system of collective security, similar to what the League of Nations platform was, but they revived it, right? Basically, is what they did. Pretty much the same thing: collective security, sovereign equality, human rights, international law. And I would say they failed because I'm going to show you, because of basically when they get into the SDGs that talked about a lot, that was beginning of the end. Unfortunately, it's still going and they're pushing it big time. I got a video I'd like to play. I can bring it up here, and it's a gentleman speaking. I can't remember his name. I do have the description or the link in the description rather, and he gives
politicians, academics, and others who collectively decide our global future, often without democratic consent.
Sorry, he got ahead of me. He's very eager to speak, isn't he? So it's 35 minutes long. I hope you enjoy it. He has a lot to say, and I've got to get back up here and let's get it going.
Politicians, academics, and others who collectively decide our global future, often without democratic consent. And they exist as an interconnected network of the ideologically captured elite, from the World Economic Forum to the World Health Organization or World Trade Organization or International Court of Justice, or countless NGOs and charities, but at the heart of it all, the United Nations. And they collectively decide on the trajectory of the world within their elitist echo chambers. So no matter who we vote for, we always get the same agenda, the same ideology, their ideology. And speaking of the agenda, we're going to use the United Nations Agenda 2030 to explore how this operates. Hi, my name is Tom and this is my channel Integral Views. Now, I have read thousands of pages of United Nations 2030 documents and various other associated documents because I really wanted to get an understanding of the mechanisms by which this agenda works. What this fundamentally represents is an inversion of the bottom-up democratic process whereby ideas are agreed upon within a culture based on the lived experience of citizens within that culture that then proliferate up into politics and the politicians act upon the priorities of the people. It inverts that process such that you then have an elitist top-down philosophy and an agenda that comes from an elitist group at the top. It is fundamentally not voted for and often cuts directly counter to the democratic will of citizens within a nation. And this is why, no matter how we vote, we always get the same outcomes. Progression toward the same outcomes, the same vision, the same agenda. Before we get started, please remember to like the video if you like it and subscribe to my channel if you're not already and you would like to hear more from me. But what is the United Nations 2030 Agenda? Well, in 2015, it was agreed upon by all heads of state for the nations that are members of the United Nations, and that was in 2015. And then they created these Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17. And these Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, are a replacement or development of Millennium Development Goals which preceded them. And these Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs, were in place from the year 2000 to 2015. They were developed in collaboration between the UN and the World Bank. And here's a look at the Sustainable Development Goals. You can pause and have a look if you want to. Essentially what these represent is this utopian vision of the future. The way to think about this is that our leaders, right, the heads of state of the United Nations member states, all got together and convinced themselves of this fantastical version of the future within these little closed echo chambers. And then they went about trying to apply that across the world within their nation states, all contributing toward it. So for example, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, go down the list, right? It basically covers everything. And down the bottom there, you've got life on land, life below water. It's basically everything. The whole world, right, is encapsulated within these SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals. This is a high-level overview, but when you really get into the detail, you've got all of these different sort of segments or development goals that go, targets or metrics that drop down beneath these Sustainable Development Goals, and they get quite specific around how to achieve these things. So the point is, at a high level, it looks like this utopian version of the future, this fantastical vision, right? And this is what these leaders have got in their head, and that's why they feel so righteous in terms of implementing it. It kind of acts like a religion in a sense. And on the surface, they're very, very difficult to argue with. So who's going to argue against having no poverty? Who's going to argue against having zero hunger, etc.? In the United Nations, they have this platform where you can submit progress against these SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals. And this is what it looks like. So it says SDG Actions Platform is a global registry of voluntary policies, commitments, multi-stakeholder partnerships and other initiatives made by governments, the UN system, broad range of stakeholders. So it's not just governments that are committing to this and then contributing toward it. It's large corporations, it's kind of activist groups, you name it, lots, NGOs, etc. And if you look down at the bar chart down here, and I will zoom in here, what you can see is all of these different initiatives that have been submitted against each of these SDGs. So you've got thousands. This is a massive industry. Now, I've read thousands of literally thousands of pages of UN submissions, and I know how this works. Okay, I wanted to make sure I did, and essentially it is a huge industry, the likes of which it's very difficult to convey in a short video, so I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but trust me, this is a huge industry. Now, as I said, in 2015, all of the heads of state of the different United Nations member states, they got together and they agreed upon this, and then they put their backing for it, right? So they signed up to this program, this agenda. And you can see that here, General Assembly, resolution adopted by the General Assembly in 2015. And within this document, and this is coming from the heads of state of the United Nations member states, it says, on behalf of the peoples we serve, we have adopted a historic decision on a comprehensive, far-reaching and people-centered set of universal and transformative goals and targets, we commit ourselves to working tirelessly for the full implementation of this agenda by 2030. So what this is actually saying by our heads of government is we have all adopted and agreed upon this agenda, and we will now implement this throughout all of our nations. And the thing I want to point out is that they talk about this being transformative and far-reaching, and it very, very much is. It touches essentially everything, which I'll show later in the video. And this is the vision that our heads of state have adopted. In these goals and targets, we are setting out a supremely ambitious and transformational vision. We envisage a world free of poverty, hunger, disease, and want, where all life can thrive. We envisage a world free of fear and violence, a world with universal literacy, a world with equitable and universal access to quality education at all levels, to healthcare and social protection, where physical, mental, and social well-being are assured. A world where we reaffirm our commitments regarding the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation, and where there is improved hygiene, and where food is sufficient, safe, affordable, and nutritious. A world where human habits are safe, resilient, and sustainable, and where there is universal access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. So in other words, a utopia. And it's not very difficult to imagine a utopia and just say these things, is it? It's difficult to kind of disagree with them. It is a fantasy, right? But what our world leaders are now engaged in is implementing that in a top-down fashion. They want to implement it no matter the democratic will or the local issues, for example, or the priorities of citizens. Right, they will implement policies that they feel contribute toward these goals as a priority. Now, a lot of criticism that you'll see online about these cabals, these global elite, these networks, will take the position of saying that they are just extremely harmful in terms of their intent, that they are evil and they want to control everything and control everyone, and then, do harm, cause harm. But it's so important that we're accurate. I've read thousands of these documents, I've watched loads of speeches, and I am utterly convinced that the vast majority of them really believe in this utopian vision. They really think that they are doing the right thing, something that's really amazingly good, and they want to be the heroes of their own story. Unfortunately, the results that they're producing are directly counter to what their intentions were. So just think about it from their perspective. They have been elected as leaders and they care about their legacy. So then what they do is they go to these United Nations conferences, closed door conferences, and within those closed doors where they'll have experts come and NGOs and people, right, who will come in and all be talking the same language around this utopia, they will become completely convinced of this future utopia and then feel very righteous in their belief for it and the overriding of democratic will, because they really believe that they're going to usher in this world with clean water and amazing education and equality, you name it, right down through the list. Perfect world. That's what they're actually invested in. What they're missing is that if you try to implement that kind of thing from the top down, it doesn't work, and you start to produce the opposite results because it disconnects the leadership from practical reality of the experience of citizens in the country. So now let's take a look at how these United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals actually manifest within a country, right? So I'll give you this example. This is from the United Kingdom, and this is Agenda 2030 Global Goals. Now what this document does is it directly reflects the Sustainable Development Goals that were decided within the United Nations. It reflects it within the United Kingdom government, and we go much further than this, but this is where it starts. The next step is that United Nations member states will submit these voluntary submissions that track their progress against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The documents that are submitted are very lengthy. I have read around 20 of them, and they are hundreds of pages each. So I really wanted to understand how this actually functions to make sure I'm representing it correctly. The reason I've done this is because I think it's incredibly important. We need to understand how many people in Britain actually understand any of this. And yet it's determining policy, it's determining the direction of our country. This is what's in the heads of all of our political elite. Okay, now the United Kingdom version of this, it looks like this, right? This is the cover of it. And this was produced under the Conservative government, under Boris Johnson's government in 2019 by our very own Rory Stewart. Rory Stewart, who, by the way, now leads the second most listened to podcast that is created in the United Kingdom in the world. So the man who produced this, who is entirely indoctrinated into this globalist vision, who sits alongside Alistair Campbell in his very popular podcast, and I won't talk about him, I really want to, but I'm not going to, disgraceful man. These two individuals, right, are talking to millions of people across Britain all the time, and this subtle kind of communication, this subtle view that is all informed by this globalist vision, this globalist agenda. So this is the document. As I speak, I'm going to scroll through this document. Now, this one for the United Kingdom is 235 pages long, and it goes into very great detail that shows how we track progress in many, 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 many different metrics against each of those sustainable development goals. So this determines, right, a lot of governmental policy. It is prioritized right the way through governmental departments, through the civil service, through government. And it becomes, these metrics that we then prioritize that align into this United Nations Agenda 2030, which is a globalist agenda. It's not necessarily the priorities of the citizens, but because we start to track statistics that are associated with that agenda, that's what we then focus on. And this happens in successive governments, right? Because essentially the departments, when you go from one leadership government, so the Conservatives to Labour, it doesn't change all of the entire department. Of course, the majority of staff, the civil service, is still there, still working against the same metrics, and those metrics tie in to the 2030 agenda of the United Nations very often. And essentially, in the creation of those metrics, right, because we're tracking those, what are we not tracking? Are they all aligned perfectly with the priorities of British citizens? Absolutely not, I can tell you that for sure. And it's not just Britain, of course, the EU is at it as well, and so are pretty much all of the United Nations member states. There are dozens and dozens of these documents. It is an industry. But the EU love this stuff, so they produce this document once every year, and this one is 325 pages. And what you'll see in all these documents, not all of them, but a lot of them, is that even the metrics that are used are similar across documents, right? So it's basically countries copying each other and doing the same things and focusing in the same ways. They even use the same colors for the same different areas that's all aligned into the Sustainable Development Goals in the United Nations. So this is how the United Nations globalist ideology and agenda flows directly down as a straight line down from there directly into democratic government, and it starts to determine governmental policy. And I wondered, is there any way that I can get my view heard and get myself into any of these discussions? Now, what they'll do is they have these high-level political forum on sustainable development. They have these meetings, closed-door meetings. And the people that are in those meetings are essentially, the member states, so the heads of the member state or representatives of the member states, and then selected NGOs, academics, charities, people who are invited. So it's closed. They decide who comes along. And the people who come along are all people who are ideologically captured within that ideology. And so it becomes a groupthink, an echo chamber of epic global proportions. Now, I don't want to make this a highly technical review where I go into minute detail, but I'll just give you one example, right, that will show how the priorities of citizens might not align with these larger United Nations agenda sustainable development goals, right? So this is SDG 10, right? And it says reduce inequality within and among countries. So it basically makes it a priority for Britain, for example, to reduce inequality among countries. So our priority as Britain then becomes reducing inequality between us and other nations. Well, wouldn't our success hopefully lead to us moving further ahead and maybe contribute to more inequality? Additionally, if you look at all of our success in the past, right, who's to say that inequality among nations is a bad thing, right? Because actually, in the past, when you see countries really pushing ahead, they will often produce innovations or technologies, etc., that benefit the rest of the world hugely. So Britain is a great example of that. because we had the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution. We ended slavery. I'll just put that in there. But we had the Industrial Revolution, and that caused living standards to raise hugely around the world in a way that had never happened before. That wasn't a result of us reducing inequalities. In a sense, it was because of inequalities we had the ability to do that then rose the living standards. Okay? And so the point is that philosophically, it's not completely clear that if we do a global socialism where we just make everyone exactly the same, that's actually a net benefit for everyone. Now, I want to provide a little bit of detail on this one, just so you can understand that when you start to go deeper levels of this, you start to see that that high level goal of reduce inequality that sounds good and is difficult to argue against actually manifests as things that kind of implemented within national policy that might not be aligned with citizens' will. So, for example, 10A, implement the principle of special and differential treatment for developing countries, in particular least developed countries, in accordance with the World Trade Organization agreement. So essentially what this is doing is it is saying we need to have special treatment and preferential treatment within markets for developing countries, and we need to implement that globally against what would happen within a free market. And the point is this: who's to say that that's a benefit for that country overall in their development? That is an assumption that's being made. Who's to say that that's correct? Because if you give unfair advantage, special advantage, maybe it prevents them from developing such that they can compete within a free market. And so I think that it's not completely clear that that's right. Also, you're implementing by force at a global level a distortion of markets. And how do you know? Like, they're assuming that that is a net benefit for the world, but you don't know that that's the case. Because how do you know how they would develop otherwise if they weren't given that? It's not completely clear. And when you start doing this globally, that's never been done before, right? Then yeah, it's not a good thing in my opinion. And there are 169 such targets, right? High level targets, and then you've got loads of metrics under each one. It's a huge thing. But anyway, 10C, by 2030, reduce to less than 3% the transaction costs of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. What that means, right, is remittances are the payments that migrants make back to their home country. And what this is saying is that we need to reduce collectively globally, right, the charges, the cost for anybody to send money from where they are to where they came from. So for example, right, essentially someone comes, say, even illegally into the United Kingdom, isn't on benefits, and then starts doing these remittances back home, let's say Somalia or Sudan. Okay, now what the United Nations is saying is you need to reduce those remittances down to 3% or less by 2030. Who are you to say that? Who are you to say that that is in the interest of British people overall? Who are you to say? And I don't necessarily agree with that, in the context of mass migration whatsoever. So who is this global, undemocratic, unelected consortium, cabal of elites to tell us what it is that we should be doing with regard to remittance charges out of this country? I think that, so essentially what that's doing, right? They're saying, well, we need to reduce global inequality between nations. And then you start to see how illegal immigration and mass migration plays into this. And remittances, it all plays into equality of outcome, right, across the whole world. There are poor nations, right, that are poor because of their culture and resources and behaviors, etc. But ultimately what they're saying is now we need to make it all completely equal. And you can see how the ideology drives a lot of the stuff that's happening across a lot of Europe and the Western world. Now, this approach of globalist, top-down, elitist governance has really been ramping up through the United Nations for many years before 2015, because they had other sets of development goals before that, right? And now they've got new ones that came in into 2024, and they will just never stop. Okay, now I just want to reflect on how is this all playing out? Is everything really working? Is everything going well? Especially for someone in Britain or Europe or, the developed world. Is this what we really wanted? Is this in our best interest? Now, I don't think so. But this is essentially this ever-expanding monster. So you've got the United Nations Climate Change Agency, you've got the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, And I went and looked at some of the videos they produce, and I really got the sense of this cult. It is this echo chamber cult, this globalist echo chamber cult that is by invitation only, and only if you agree with that in-group in-think of the elite, who will then decide what needs to be done and drop that down top down onto the world, right? No matter what people think, because they know better, right? But what are some of the things that this globalist elitist cult get up to on a day-to-day basis? Well, they've got all of these videos, so I went and had a look through some of them because I wanted to understand. So I'll give you some examples. High-level event to commemorate the International Day to Combat Islamophobia, of course. And then this one, high-level celebration of World Water Day 2026, celebrating water. Celebrating water, cool. And then this one, which is on the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Slavery of the Transatlantic Slave Trade. I noticed they don't have similar for the Arabian slave trade or many other slave trades throughout history. And by the way, I made a video on the ridiculous request that comes from the United Nations for huge amounts of reparations to be paid, right? So isn't that weird how it's so imbalanced? But if you think that's weird, check this out. They're very big on these International Day of and Remembrance of events. This cult, right? So check this one out. 12th International Day of Yoga at the United Nations. International Day of Yoga, all right, if you want. Weird. And then how about this one? International Tea Day 2026. This is no joke. That is these are like multi-hour events within these chambers. Tea. Anyway, right. Next, International Jazz Day, celebrating communities in rhythm. And how about this one? Celebration of World Football Day 2026. Why do we need a United Nations International World Football Celebration Day? We've got the World Cup. What are these people playing at? Now, the ironic thing about these sustainable development goals is that I think that they are entirely unsustainable. And the reason for this is because they are implemented in a top-down fashion by an established closed-door elite. Okay? Instead of really kind of filtering up from below, from the people, through culture, through liberal democracies, and then having politicians enact the will of those people, that would be a sustainable development, right? Because it's aligned with what the people actually want, right? Instead, it's this top-down elitist control of, and it's not just that, it's the fact that it is this ideology. It is very cult-like. When you start going through it and you see the colors and everything, you see how people get sucked into it. It becomes their identity, right? And these are like the politicians. So Keir Starmer is an example, and many others, right? Ursula von der Leyen, you name it. There are many others. Okay, and you can see how it starts to manifest through them. And what this ultimately causes is that the governments lose credibility with the voters, because the governments, the elite, the people in power, who are then part of these global structures, they then start to implement policies that are completely at odds with the priorities of the citizens. And they start to say things that don't align with what's happening on the ground for people. And this is exactly what's happening. Now, in Great Britain, what we're seeing is the establishment parties, Labour and Conservatives, being disliked, booted out of government, hanging on by a thread, and eventually will be completely eradicated and gotten rid of. And then in their place, we've got the growth of the Green Party on the left, and then Reform and Restore, etc., on the right. So they're displacing these establishment parties. And the reason that these establishment parties have really fallen out of favour is because they're aligned with these global level ideologies that don't represent the actual practical reality for citizens on the ground. But it's not just me that thinks this, and actually when I started to read some criticisms, they came to very much the same conclusions as me, and I think the actual beliefs of those who are expressing these views, right, these critical views that align with what I think that they're actually on the political left. So it's kind of like we're coming at it from different angles but reaching the same conclusion. One example of this is this Oxford Academic Policy and Society study, okay? And this is by anthropologists, world-renowned, world-leading anthropologists. And in that document it says the following. In this paper, we have argued that the SDGs have brought about a much larger and fundamental shift of direction. If the MDGs, they're the ones that preceded the SDGs, represented a new infrastructure of measurement at a global scale. Quantification of the context of the SDGs can be conceptualized as ideas on steroids, such powerful ideas that they become unspoken. These are similar to the price of entry, where if one does not share the paradigm, one is not part of the conversation. That is such a nice way of expressing it. So it becomes this all encompassing ideology or worldview. It becomes the identity of the individual that inhabits that worldview. They then become part of this elite group, and in order to be a member of that elite group, they have to have this belief system that they then go and implement within their nations on the little plebs, right? The people of that nations who know no better and aren't as good as them because they're part of that elite. So that's what's actually happening. And further from that document, hence we see the epistemic infrastructure of the SDGs as portraying a paradigmatic shift in the governance of global public policy. Essentially, to summarize that, what it means is that we're seeing this complete shift in the paradigm of how the world works in terms of governmental policy. So it's not just a small shift from what the United Nations used to do with setting these priorities. It's a fundamental shift in the way that the world works. And further from this document, fourth, the SDGs are not an add-on to national policies. Instead, they enter national agendas by being recontextualized within national priorities and plans. Each country is expected to nationalize the SDGs to produce a measurement infrastructure that matches as closely as possible to the global SDG framework to shape and be shaped by national priorities. And what that is saying is that the United Nations Agenda 2030 is not something that governments are doing in addition to their national priorities. In fact, the SDGs, or the United Nations Agenda 2030, forms the core of the national priorities. Right? There's a big difference there. It's not like you're doing your national priorities as a government on the basis of the democratic will of the people you represent, and then you happen to do this nice United Nations stuff globally on top. Right? Actually, the way that it works is that you take all of those United Nations 2030 SDGs and you reflect all of the same metrics within your national governance, and then that becomes your priority at a nation state level, but it's decided from the top undemocratically. Now, in truth, this has been the way that it's been for humanity for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you could think about monarchies where they would do kind of a top-down implementation of the way things should work within the country. But the thing that's really insidious about this United Nations model is that it is global in nature. That's a big, big difference. In addition, the way that they're operating in these closed group echo chambers and the way that they're very disconnected from the population, which is why they say things that just sound completely bizarre so much of the time and don't align with the experience of citizens, right? That is relatively unique because they're forming these global networks now, and it's not just governments, it's also business leaders or mainstream media sort of representatives, right, or leaders of various different kinds. And so they form these elitist networks. And another thing about it that is very insidious is that they are entirely convinced of their moral righteousness because of their pretty colours that they use and their high level goals that they are striving toward. So ending poverty, for example, ending hunger. There's many examples, having life on land be sustainable and beautiful, and in the sea. Right? And so they are entirely convinced of their righteousness and that they're doing the right thing for people. Right, but the problem is fundamentally that, well, look at the results that you're producing. So, for example, in Britain, we are, right, and David Betts, who is a leading commentator and expert and academic on the subject of civil wars, right, he says that we're likely, or that we could enter civil war. Okay, that's what he says. He kind of says it's kind of inevitable at this point because a lot of the policies that are being implemented by this 2030 agenda at the globalist level are having consequences that are blind spots for them. And this is what happens when you do things top down. right, is that you implement things and then they have unintended consequences because you didn't consider certain outcomes or certain alternatives because you don't know everything. You only track metrics within a certain field. And that's why you have to listen to, this is the beauty of democracy. You listen to people, they vote, right? And then you implement their will because they have so much experience in their lives that feed into their vote, right? That basically represents wisdom. And I think that the closer you can get to direct democracies, right, with referendum frequently, like they have in Switzerland, for example, the better, because there is a wisdom within people because they have a much wider set of data amongst themselves of their experience than a few selected disconnected elite do. And there are many examples of this, like, for example, with mass migration, did they consider really deeply, did they consider the, the cultural differences and how they would actually manifest, how they might result in some really horrific situations in the country, and what that then might turn into? Of course not. And will they respond to that, or are they still deadlocked onto their cult-like agenda? Are they flexible that they will change and kind of change course? Or are they dead set on these multi-decade agendas? Do you see the problem? Of course, there are many scenarios in which global cooperation is very important, and it's good for us to have mechanisms and institutions for us to be able to do that. But once that ideology starts to spread into this monster, right, that is acting as a de facto global government, but without actual direct democratic will being expressed, in this top-down elitist fashion, that actually causes more harm than good. That's my view. Because look at the world. We've got war, we've got Russia at war with Ukraine, we've got all of the stuff happening in the Middle East with Iran, we've got the situation with Israel and Gaza. And is everything this utopia now? It should be. We're only a few years away from 2030. There's supposed to be a utopia coming now. It's clearly not working, right? It's clearly not working. Now, the United States has already come out and said that it does not support these sustainable development goals in this agenda of 2030. And I think Britain should join forces. I think we should even start to look at removing funding, because some of the stuff I've read is just complete insanity, complete madness, and is clearly an echo chamber groupthink. I think they need to be defunded to a very large extent, because if they can have international tea days and international yoga days and days of remembrance for this and that and everything, right? Why are we paying? Why are we funding that? Seriously. So I think we need to do a shot across the bow. I think that the next government that comes in power in the United Kingdom should say, you know what, we don't support this either. We stand with the United States, and we think this is completely mad, so we don't support it either. And by the way, if you look across Europe, a huge number of governments, major states, are moving further and further right. They are rejecting the policy positions of their establishment governments, right? Which is all the same reason. It's all connected into this. Well, I think that the United Nations should probably change course. I think it's time that you admit that 2030 utopia is not going to manifest anytime soon. And if it does manifest, it's going to happen through the cultural development of different countries. But obviously, saying that we don't agree with the United Nations 2030 agenda is not the end of our ability to provide support, because we can unilaterally provide support. In fact, we can even bilaterally or trilaterally provide support to whichever country we choose to do that to. So, for example, we could partner with the US or any other country we want to go and directly implement infrastructure improvements in developing nations. And I actually think that the whole mechanism of these charities and NGOs and the United Nations is an extremely inefficient vehicle for us to do so, because they're having international tea days, etc. They're having days of celebrating water. What are you doing? Okay, so, all right. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think this is a really important issue. More people need to be aware of this stuff. Okay, thank you so much for watching this video.
So, uh, he brought up a lot of good points, sir. One point is that the problem with change of government is the fact that the civil servants are still there. They're still working on all that stuff. And until you get rid of those ones that are working on those programs, it's just going to carry on, right? So it's, I think it was a good presentation, and the link is down below if you want to check out more of his videos. And I do have another one I'm going to bring up here shortly. It's only 4 minutes long. But these SDGs, people have kind of forgotten about them. And we're getting close to 2030. And they're working pretty hard to get this through. And I seen somebody commented earlier that 2015 is when Trudeau came in. Of course, he signed right up with it, but also Obama, right? So uh, so we got a hard road ahead of us. Uh, there is some bright light on the future. They're backing off on some things. Let's get a 4 minute video here from Mark Morano from the Climate Depot, and Mark's quite happy. And when Mark is happy, we should be happy too. So let's take a look at what Mark's got to say.
So welcome to the 17th conference, now here held in Germany. You're a long visitor already. So can you summarize your presentation in about 3 sentences?
In 3 sentences? No, I cannot. Next question. No, no. What I basically said was that this is the low point for climate fear mongering of the last 50 years of the environmental movement. And I think we should all celebrate that. I think Donald Trump lit the spark. COVID overreach was a key moment in this. And even though Europe is still struggling much more than the US, I think the US success of rolling back the climate agenda and net zero is going to trickle down to Europe. Maybe not fast enough, but it's coming here, and I think that's a good thing. And I think the people are just sick of fear mongering, whether it's COVID, public health, climate change, and I really think we're in a good spot to start fighting back on this. This is really time for optimism.
What do you think are the questions people are supposed to ask to end up in the right point or the right starting point?
Well, I think they're asking the right question in the sense that they've been told for decades, first of all, that 5 years we're all going to die. The Earth has 10 years. There's this tipping point. They've been told solar and wind are cheaper than fossil fuels, and they're about to take over. But you can go back 100 years, 80% of our energy is fossil fuels. You can go back 20 years, 80% of our energy is fossil fuels. You can go back 5 years. So I think those are the questions to ask: is what's the cost benefit analysis? What's the success rate, assuming we face the climate crisis? Has it worked? Are we transitioning to solar and wind? Can the government regulate climate, as I was trying to talk about? Those are the questions people need to ask. And the answer is just like a virus, standing 6 feet or however many meters that is. I'm American, so I don't know the metric system. But standing however far away isn't going to prevent a virus, and putting little sticky tapes on the floor isn't going to control a virus. Neither is turning off your air conditioner in a hot summer heat wave going to stop climate change or storms.
So you were talking about many myths. What is, in your sense, the biggest myth on the table?
The biggest single myth is that mankind is driving a climate crisis, followed by mankind can solve a climate crisis by essentially turning our economy over to a minion of unelected social and economic planners who would regulate every aspect of our life, from your ceiling fans to your washer to your dryer to your air conditioning to your car to your diet to your construction of your house to your freedom of movement. That's one of the biggest myths, that if we just change everything about human existence, we can stop those storms. That's pretty scary stuff. It's witchcraft. It's medieval witchcraft brought to the 21st century.
Understood. And what is your key takeaway from this conference? Now, you've been visiting for many conferences already.
Yes.
You've been visiting Germany many times. What is this conference benefiting you?
Well, first of all, I love the turnout. I love the optimism, and I love all these different speakers you guys are bringing in. This is the cream of the crop. You have a Nobel Prize winner in science. You have astrophysicists. You have Will Happer, the foremost expert on greenhouse gases. It is a treat to come, and I think these conferences are so important, particularly in Europe, the home of the evil Ursula von der Leyen and the whole EU bureaucracy. I believe these kind of conferences are just critically important to motivate people, organize people, and get the message out.
Thank you very much.
All right.
See you next time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Mark, always get a kick out of Mark. The other thing the UN has done is they've finally caved in, said, well, those cow burps and farts, yeah, no, that's really not doing anything. So we really need some food, and we might get some beef out of this. It's insane, isn't it? Uh, I don't know. I've been, like I say, watching this for a few years now, 7 years or so, and it's finally starting to crack. But it explains a lot when you look at, like right now, with the Canadian government, with Carney and his green agenda. He's still pushing it because he's got big bucks in it. But the people are still buying it here in Canada. They think, oh yeah, you guys are crazy. You're going to destroy the planet. It's our chance to shine and save the planet. We'll go broke, but we'll be, I don't know, popular? No, we'll be stupid. And Trump has put the brakes on things on the UN. I think that's why they're all backing off, a lot of them, because if they want to do deals with the US, they better play ball. And Trump's got the ball. So we're going to be hurt bad here in this country. We are hurting now. But Carney and the liberals and the people I talk to out there that are so bought in by this media, and the propaganda is so strong. You see, like I had this one guy, I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but he said, all Pierre Poilievre does is whine. He just whines. He's a whiner. He's a whiner. He'll never be prime minister. Well, that's Scott Reed. His exact words. This guy watches all the talk programs, political commentary on the left. I went in and caught him. He's 80 years old. I went in and caught him watching The View. Same with my old biker buddy. He was sitting there watching The View. I couldn't believe it. I walked in, hadn't seen him in years. He got a big screen on. He's sitting there watching The View. I see The View is, they're talking about discontinuing it on, I think it's ABC is the network. So good for ABC if that's who it is. I like to see them gone, done. John Minot, Golden Dome, Canada's last chance. The government of Canada just banned the United States from bidding on military vehicles to sell to Canada. We're going down. German subs that we don't need, and they're going to be a decade getting here. At least it's better than the ones that Chrétien bought that caught fire on the way over and killed one of the sailors, and the rest of them died shortly thereafter with severe cancer from all the carcinogens that were in the burning products. And the other one sunk. I know submarines are supposed to go down, but they're supposed to come back up too. Went down, hit bottom over on the west coast, and I don't know what happened with that one. They got it up, but it was damaged, and they were in mothballs over in England anyways. Brits were surprised that somebody actually bought them. Same with the helicopters. The Sea Kings were falling out of the air. They kept them in the air. Chrétien wouldn't buy more helicopters. They were crashing. That was the big joke in Halifax. Watch out! Look up! Sea King in the air. Sea King overhead. Get out of the way. So our military's a shambles. Conservatives tried. I don't know how hard they tried. I guess they had a majority for 4 years, but I don't know what happened there. So anyways, they did do a few things. But what they did get, Trudeau gave away to Ukraine with long billions of dollars, and Carney's still funneling money over there. So we're going broke. I got a little fly buzzing around me. So we're going broke. Promises are cheap. The results are expensive. I don't know. Nick, told my mom I was pissed off what they're doing. She said, being angry won't change anything. So just be positive. It's hard to be positive these days. Trudeau's having fun bopping around like a 16-year-old. Katy Perry videos. He's in another one I see. Like he's just a blithering idiot. He always was. That's an embarrassment. 10 years, people kept voting. If people would keep voting that thing in, I know the Conservatives didn't have anybody running against them. Scheer was no good and O'Toole was horrible. So, anyways, we got a country that is leaning very hard left, and they've got this anti-American BS going around, and people think they're being true patriotic Canadians, like damn the U.S. We don't want anything to do with them. And oh yeah, yeah. Well, don't go asking for help later because it won't be there. So these people are idiots. Plumber's Greg's still battling the census Nazis. Yeah, I got a off-grid camp and I got notices for the censor. I almost said censorship. That's coming. It's here anyways. For the census is what I'm trying to say. I got my final notice in the mail there the other day because I have another mailbox up there. I don't live there. It's off-grid, but anyways, whatever. They can go beat on the door. I'm not there. I'm very rarely there. So that's the state of this country. People just don't know. I mentioned a few things on people that I thought had their head screwed on straight, and if you mention U.S. or Trump or something, they lose it. Okay, you'll see. What have we got? 40 manufacturers talking about now going to the U.S. How many thousands, tens of thousands of people have moved to the U.S. from Canada? They came to your house. You did it in the sidewalk. Uh, anyways, we got to stick together. Keep getting the word out. Messages like this, hopefully, uh, we're being noticed. Put it that way. Not in a good way, but we're being noticed, especially in the U.S. I'm going to do one more video. It's just under 3 minutes long, and it's Bill Maher. You'll probably get a kick out of this one, but what he says is true.
There's only one problem with thinking everything's better in Canada. It's not. Not anymore, anyway. Last year, Canada added 1.3 million people, which is a lot in 1 year, the equivalent of the U.S. adding 11 million migrants in 1 year. And now they're experiencing a housing crisis even worse than ours. And we're sleeping in tents. The median price of a home here is 346 grand. In Canada, converted to U.S. dollars, it's 487. If Barbie moved to Winnipeg, she wouldn't be able to afford her dream house, and Ken would be working at Tim Hortons. And because of mortgage debt, Canada has the highest debt to GDP ratio of any G7 nation. I don't know what that means, but it sounds bad. So does their vaunted healthcare system, which ranks dead last among high-income countries in access to primary health care and ability to see a doctor in a day or two. And it's not for lack of spending. Of the 30 countries with universal coverage, Canada spends over 13% of its economy on it, which is a lot of money for free health care. Look, I'm not saying Canada still isn't a great country. It is, but those aren't paradise numbers. If Canada was an apartment, the lead feature might be America adjacent. And if America was a rental car, Canada would be America or similar. And again, honestly, Canada, I'm not saying any of this because I enjoy it. I don't, because I've always enjoyed you. But I need to cite you as a cautionary tale to help my country. And the moral of that tale is, yes, you can move too far left. And when you do, You wind up pushing the people in the middle to the right. At its worst, Canada is what American voters think happens when there's no one putting a check on extreme wokeness, like the saga of Canadian shop teacher Kayla Lemieux, whose pronouns are she, her, and those. Kayla is now back to being a guy named Kerry, but 2 years ago, when they showed up to teach children, the progressive high school they taught at said that they, the school, not the person. Really, you couldn't have found another word. We were using that one. Anyway, okay. They were committed to a safe environment for gender expression. Safe for who? What about the children? What about the equipment in that shop class?
Yeah, I don't watch them either there, John, but I came across it, and since he was talking about Canada, and yeah, you can tell it's canned laughter, can't you? But anyways, and Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan is another piece of work, doesn't he? Can't stand that guy either. But he just brought up some points of Canada that are true, and we're going down daily. So, anyways, thanks for joining in. Good to see everybody on here, and we'll do it again next week. Started watching the World Cup, but it's next Sunday. But oh well, we're gonna do the live stream. So, God bless America. God help Canada. Hang in there, folks. That's all I can say. So once again, thanks again. If you like it, hit the like button. Share it if you want. We'll talk to you later. You take care now. God bless.